Thanks for listening to Fluff and Crunch, where we talk about the connection and sometimes disconnect between system, setting, and story in tabletop RPGs. So actually, we're recording this at the end, but now that we're getting better at YouTube, I think maybe a little bit. We recognize that we're supposed to tell you to like,
subscribe,
ring the bell,
join the conversation,
comments,
or on our Discord.
Leave comments, buy the collapsible drinking glass,
join our Patreon that we don't have.
Right. And tell your friends and give our show away as a stocking stuffer to your neighbors and stuff. That's what you're supposed to do. So now we're starting the video like this. Now we can go into our content.
Hi, Jeremy.
Hi, Chris. Yeah, we have El Cheapo Zoom. I have El Cheapo Zoom now. So we only have 40 minutes to record. We're like 3 minutes into it. And I know that you haven't done it. Well, maybe you haven't done any gaming. I haven't done any gaming because we only talked a few days ago.
No, I haven't. Well, actually, I played a game of Shatterpoint against myself because...
that counts.
Which was bad because I'd done a run and then I cooked tea and then I stood up for 2 hours playing against myself. And at the end of that, realized I was in agony and I spent most of yesterday limping.
Yeah, there's that whole thing.
Because we're old.
When you get north of 40 years old, you cannot stay in any one position for too long, even if the position seems comfortable. Nope.
No, standing, it's so strange. Well, I can walk and I can run, just standing still, it's agony. Yeah. So I have to literally now I need to go for a walk or I need to kneel down or I have to go up and down, just standing still. My knees just start playing up. It's awful.
Me too. Well, all that aside, we're here to talk about character generation. We're here to talk about character generation in the games that you and I are respectively trying to develop.
Yeah, so I think it was pretty clear at the end of the last episode which way we would be heading towards in terms of which of the different things. Just a quick recap. We kind of had the idea of, the one end you've got the kind of the D&D menu system where a lot of it's, you can pick this, and that's it. And there's not a lot of choice. So then the far extreme where you've got the point buy, you can buy everything. And then we kind of said there's quite a few things, or there's life paths, and then there's quite a few things that fall into that. There's like a little bit of point buy, but you get this many points here, and this many points here, and this many points here. And we were mostly talking about that. One thing I said we do need to talk about to add to that, but also link to what our games is actually, even if we both go, right, we're doing the multiple point buy thing or the selection of different things, what actually then makes up a character, which is why I've got this. No, it's kind of that. I've moved back and forth enough, it thinks it's real. Because although we don't play Cortex Prime, Cortex does a very good job at breaking down, here's all the different bits that could make up a character. So I thought we'd run through some of these as these are things to consider when, and then which ones we can put. Because, the most bog standard, obvious one that we've seen since, actually it's not since Day X, because I was going to say stat plus skill. Well, that's a lie.
Because it's just stats and derived attributes.
Yeah, because old school role-play games didn't have skills.
Yep.
They just had stats. Skills were, D&D didn't really get skills until 3rd edition.
They had something. Well, anyway, yeah. Basically,
I'm not counting proficiencies,
right?
So proper skills. So I think the first time I saw like a system that was actually stat plus skill, like it is in, like we have now in most systems, possibly was World of Darkness. Because like I've talked about Ghostbusters and Star Wars a lot, but that was your skill is inside your stats. So that wasn't really stat plus skill. Like, I guess it kind of was. Maybe it was Star Wars then. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't know.
So obviously one of the big things, we'll start with a really obvious one, and it's on the first page, but there's another one here I want to bring in. One of the obvious things is the idea of attributes, as in, a physical, all-consuming thing, which is super important.
Yep.
We see that in so many systems. We have it in virtually all the 2D20 games. We have it in D&D. We have it in World of Darkness.
Only extreme outliers don't have some kind of measurement of some sort of innate traits.
Yeah. And the idea is that, if you're strong, you're good at everything which requires physical strength. If you're charismatic, you're good at everything that requires and so on. And actually, the systems that that, I think that's is the sacred cow is the right word for that. I think that is something you can ditch, because the reality is actually most people are kind of in the middle, and arguably skills are more important, particularly to a role-playing game. If you're trained at something, you're skilled at something. Most people really would be tens across the board that widely vary in their skills.
Yeah.
You know, most people are not super strong or super intelligent. Maybe intelligence maybe varies a bit more. And we could both list off examples for the next half an hour of really clever and really stupid people. We're not going to. But I think most things, and you get the odd charismatic, but I think for a lot of the other stuff,
people are pretty center of mass.
Yeah, but the skills do massively vary because that's the thing you're trained in. No, so I'm going off things. So attributes is a clear thing. Are you thinking of having attributes in your game, Jeremy?
You know, I guess, and I wouldn't call this an unexamined assumption, but I think that I don't know if I've looked at it deeply. I guess I just assumed. I assumed, and yet now you've got, this ruins everything, but it doesn't. It's actually helpful. It would be really easy to just take the typical, have a stat. I have stats. I have 8 of them. Because I divided agility and dexterity. I added perception as an attribute, not a skill. So I have 8.
Wait a minute. Your perception is not linked to how wise you are, but surely those are 2 things that go hand in hand.
Absolutely
Willpower and perception are the same thing.
No, they're not.
Sorry, just a dig at 5e.
Yeah, a dig at that norm. No, I have 8. I'm happy with them, but I don't know. Maybe you make a point there that maybe you go with skills, and then you pick. You could create a class of like, and I'm just off the top of my head term features. You have additional features of the character that are like salient features. Like, yeah, my character is actually really strong, or he's or she's like, really, really perceptive, that kind of thing. You could create features that someone would pick to add to something. And so in a situation where something like, perception would be useful, you would add that to a skill or factor that somehow into the role. And the rest of the way, you just assume average. So, and maybe you could say like, yeah, my character's kind of a dope, he's not how's a guy who's just not very charismatic for some reason. You could get a bonus in something else because you opt to take a negative feature instead of a positive feature, and then you just ignore everything else because it's assumed to just be average, and therefore it's kind of narrative.
I think it makes a difference to how many skills. I think if you've got a short skill list of sort of like, we're only going to have like 10 skills, then those 10 skills probably fall in so closely to your attributes that you don't need both. They're probably over. If you've got huge amounts of skills, then maybe that's different. Okay, but I think I almost think like the smaller your skill list is, stat plus skill becomes.
Yeah.
Like your chances is like, also you got things like, it depends a lot on what your attributes are, and we'll get to that. We can do a quick thing about different attributes. Constitution is almost like constitution or toughness or stamina. That kind of attribute is almost never used for any kind of skill thing. It ends up, it's what you roll saves against, and it bumps your health. But it's always like,
you've got some systems where there's like an endurance skill, like, which it's just arguable. Is that more like a innate trait you develop, or is that something you like, I learned how to be tough when I'm
so I've already got you thinking something. Attributes are not yes, they are probably.
Where are you on this?
I'm undecided. I did a version kind of the last time I knocked up a thing. I used what was in
knocked up.
What the not fate. Whatever the Green Ronin thing is that also powered. I can't remember anything. The space thing that we watched that's on Amazon. Why am I blanking on anything? That's the one.
Yeah.
So the thing that powered the Expanse. That's the one.
Age system. Adventure.
That kind of had. Your thing, they didn't call it, I might have been called attributes, but some of them were like sort of fighting and accuracy, and then different things were inside those. Or like if you think of Star Wars, where you have like one of your stats is like technical and one is mechanical, which aren't attributes, but everything falls inside them. So then they're not your standard things. They kind of they're this mixture of sort of skill
You made a really good
and
point.
that kind of thing.
You made a really good point, especially so you have a longer or you have a skill list. Like, for example, uh, free leagues, year zero, whether it's the dice pool or the step dice, you only have 12 skills. And those
Yeah.
skills are each there are three groups of four, and they are categorized under a stat.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's a really good point. And you know what? If I decided to go with something like dispense with attributes, really, but have like features, whatever I would end up calling it, those would be you could exchange those. Like, that is, you could, if you are really strong, maybe that's helpful in intimidating someone. Maybe that's helpful in climbing up a wall. It doesn't have to be attached to one skill. It's just, is this, it's like, it would be like a trait in 2D20. Like, how is this? Okay, here's this trait. The room is on fire. In this situation, is that helpful to me or harmful to me or whatever? The feature would be, you could use it in different contexts. Okay.
So I'm looking for it. Some of the other ones in here aren't overly useful. We've got this weird one. They had attributes and now it's got abilities. Here's one that you would it's super unlikely to have, but I know we're going to have relationships. Now, I've only ever seen this once, which was in Smallville. But actually, in Smallville, it made sense. You were playing a soap, and your relationship between another character worked quite well. Outside of that kind of soapy thing, or the weird soapy versions of Powered by the Apocalypse, the original one. No, sorry, not Power, Apocalypse World. I can't see that. But something like Dune could, if you were doing like a proper Dune Game of Thrones, and what matters is the relationship between the characters. I can see that, but that's not really what we're doing. So we'll skip it.
I could see if you have that niche kind of story, or you have a story. Game of Thrones, I think, is a good example where that's even a place where like relationships or drives would essentially represent the same kind of thing, but you would really need everyone at the table to understand and buy into that. Otherwise, it becomes the stupid thing that drives often become. So, okay.
Right, so you've said it then. Let's jump onto that. My pet hate in role-playing games. You called it drives, but the other word for it is values.
Yeah.
And you can see why values make sense. Okay, so like Dune has this. Dune has your characters have values. I mean, I'll just give you an example of the kind of stuff here. So this is I can't remember this one. Duty, glory, justice, love, power, truth. Actually, that's from Smallville again. You can see how that would make sense, right? Rather than what your character is good at, you can have skills for what your character is good at, and then you can have what's important to your character. And the more important something is, the better you should do at that.
Although I'm gonna disagree to a certain extent. I think that drives like we see them, drives like we see them in Dune, are a different animal than values like we see in Star Trek Adventures. I got you. I think that the idea of them tends to be better than them in practice. Yes. I think that values, like in Star Trek Adventures, are far more workable and functional than drives in Dune. So I think there's a way that you could differentiate. You could maybe, if you had some like affirmative statements or something like that about this is really important to me, you might be able to work through that. But just like one word drives, it's too fluffy.
I think even when they've got a written description, I think it being a stat doesn't work as well as it being, this is part of my character. And then kind of, if I play my character according to this value or drive, then I get some kind of meta currency.
Yeah, okay.
And if I don't, I think that's good. The thing I don't like about drives and values as a stat, as a statistic that you roll, that's one of your things that builds up what you roll for, is that people abuse them.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Oh, I'm doing this because it's important to my duty. This is for my duty. This is also for my duty.
Yeah.
And it becomes very hard for the GM to go, oh, yeah, well, actually, yeah, you can justify all of this. And then it becomes an argument between the player and the GM to, is it valid or not? So, yeah, I am not a big fan of drives. So obviously, I'm going to skip skills for a minute, because obviously there's one way of which is skills but not skills, is roles. Now, obviously, roles will be familiar to anyone that does 2D20, because that is essentially what we have in Star Trek.
I thought you meant ROLLs. I was like, what?
ES.
You meant ES, yes.
So obviously, this was in Cortex because they used it in Leverage, because you had like hacker, hitter, blah, 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 blah. Don't know what the others are. But obviously, that is essentially what we have in Star Trek with disciplines. You have, your security and your, I don't know what they are, the 6 departments.
They're disciplines. Right. Well, they're I think they're called departments, but they were called disciplines before. Yeah.
Yeah. Departments kind of works, but then it doesn't because I kind of think like, is that a department? But yeah, you're six different things in.
Yeah.
That's actually, and you can see how that works. And it can almost work in like fantasy as well. If you kind of go, right, you've got fighter. The trouble is that you're right, fighter, rogue, wizard. Oh no, this doesn't work because if you don't want to be a wizard or a priest, yeah. So you have to think careful. Star Trek is a perfect example of where that can work,
Right.
and leverage again the idea of the different roles, but some of the
Right.
characters like a second role that works very really well. Would you be considering that in your game?
Well,
No, the answer is no.
no. I have been because what I've envisioned is like a World of Darkness style, um, like menu of buckets is how I'm looking at it, and to help clarify things for people, like, hey, I want to play the tough guy, or I want to play the sneaky guy, or whatever. What I was thinking of doing, and I've read up on, like, it varies in literature, like the 12 archetypes or the 16 character archetypes or
Mhm.
something like that. I've been looking at those and thinking about taking those, or some of them rather, and shaping them into, for lack of a better term, could be a role, could be an archetype, something like that, where you would grab one of those and that would provide a little bit of mechanical guidance, points for like this type or that type of character or something like that. So if you wanted to play like like I said, based on those roles, you could do that. And actually,
Speaking
with
of,
this whole idea of like features instead of stats, that actually might work better, because then it just becomes a couple of words, like these are the things that you would add, and that's these different situations.
that kind of thing, where you kind of have a list of different archetypes, there is another system of thought, which again, it does away with skills and it's kind of roles, but it's not pre-described, kind of pre-described. Have you ever heard of Barbarians of Lemuria? And then there's another one called Barbarians of the Aftermath.
I've heard of them, but I have not heard of that as a game.
So in Barbarians of Lemuria, or whatever it's actually called, it's kind of like a Conan thing.
Yeah,
Um,
clearly.
there's a whole bunch of like, let's call them jobs because I can't remember what they're actually called. And those work as your skill. So you go like, and you might have, say, 5 points worth of them. And each point would be like, it's either a +1 or it's a dice, because I can't remember how the system works. But you'd be like, right, I've got 2 points in fighter, and I've got 1 point in scout, and I've got 1 point in merchant. I'm making these up.
Yeah, yeah.
And another point in something else. And so anytime you roll a skill check, your skill check would be those. It'd be base jobs. And then combat was done differently. Combat was done like, so completely different
Mm.
way of working that. But it was quite a clever thing of, like, oh, well, because I'm a merchant, I'm good at haggling and I can talk to people. So I'm going to use my merchant thing. Because I'm a scout, I can do the survival stuff. Again, it kind of can fall into that thing of like, can you justify why your character is good at something? But it was
Yeah.
a nice, it's a way of you, rather than having skills, it was a way of, it brings your character's background into the actual
Yeah.
things you're rolling. So yeah, I don't think I'll be doing that, but that sounds closer to what you were kind of saying. If
Yeah.
you're thinking how can I get these archetypes in, there's a way.
Yeah.
And actually, if yours is slightly more, filmic isn't a good word, but because you're talking about like a horror as a genre, and that to
Yeah.
me always comes from film, then actually picking the archetypes, and yeah, my guy's going to be, he's hero 2, and he's, I don't know, I can't think of any of their archetypes.
Right. No, I mean,
Damsel
like,
3.
so this is here's the leader. Here's the oh my golly, I read all of these last night, and now
I know I've read them
I've
before and I'm
forgotten them.
blanking. Yeah.
But yeah, another thing also, you talked about, different systems, like combat versus skill usage. I really have, and I need to test this, but I have settled on a working version of the investigation system that is initially not based in any roles. It's based in your rating. And so based on how many points you have and skills, it looks like they're going to be 1 to 5. So based on how many points you have in a skill, you're able to ask a certain number of questions with no role when you step into a scene. So what I want to do is ensure that proper and accurate investigations can take place, because I do agree with the gumshoe take that figuring out what to do with the information and reacting to the information is a lot more interesting than having to go get all of it. Like sometimes it's interesting to feel like you unraveled a knot, but even then, like thinking of like what questions to ask and like how to investigate a room or something like that, that's interesting. The rolling and seeing whether or not you successfully got it or not is not interesting. Doing something with the information is. And so what I've got is based on scenes. You have a certain number of usages of different investigatory skills, which then when you expend that, you can then roll. Or if you don't want to spend those early, you can roll. You got a choice. So you can always try to seek out information, but you have a certain amount of usages of the skill that don't cost, you don't have to risk. So but yeah, I skills I'm trying to nail down, and it's tough actually, because having a game where stories aren't tied to a specific time period is actually a bit of a challenge when it comes to skills. And so I think I have a list of skills that are broad enough and interpretable, if that's a word, enough that, and I've got some language that I added about that, like, recognize, like I have one skill called, that I think I'm calling it technical.
Yeah,
there you go. Which would be then knowledge and experience with what's considered to be the best technology for that time period. Because your average Joe in any time period is going to be able to operate like really what would be considered mundane technology. But like in the mid 1800s, very few people, and this is actually an example I provide, very few people knew how to actually operate a telegraph in the mid 1800s, but everyone knew that they existed. No one had a problem with that. Many people utilized them, the services of, but they did not know how to use them, and they didn't know how to like fix or build them. If you had a decent technical skill and you're playing a character during the Civil War, then you could justify knowing how to fix a telegraph. Whereas that would be different in like the late 20th century.
Just to be clear for our various internationalists, he's talking about the American Civil War.
Yes, I'm not talking about like, what is it, like flat noses and round heads or something like, what is it?
Yeah. I feel half the countries in the world have had civil wars.
That's true. They're very popular, unfortunately.
Yes.
Yeah. So
hey, they just made a film about your country having one in the future, except they made up really nonsensical parts for because Texas and California were on the same side.
No.
What?
No.
Like, I'm sorry, what? No.
That
they would definitely be on the different side.
Exactly.
There's no way
whatsoever.
I know why they do, but anyway.
Anywho.
All right, one more before we talk about skills then. One thing I am seriously considering is something, there's kind of two different ways of looking at this. One is distinctions, but not how distinctions work in most Cortex things, where there's 3 things written at the top of your character sheet and they're D8. Distinctions in Smallville were like could be different things. So for Clark Kent, Superman, his distinction was like Kryptonian. He was D12 Kryptonian, and that gave him a bunch of stuff he could do, like all his super stuff. But then for someone else, it'd be like resources D8 because like Lex was quite rich, or it'd be invested. So they use distinctions to be almost like a tag thing where there was a couple of things under it and it'd be different dice ratings. Now, linked to that is how City of Mist and its various offshoots that are coming out now work, where you just have a bunch of tags. So literally your whole character is just made of descriptive things. And when you roll your dice, you add those descriptive things in. Now, it works in City of Mist. And again, it's spin-offs because you're like, right, I don't know, whatever. I'm hitting someone, right, I'm going to use my angry. I've got angry as a tag, so I'm using angry. I've got fist fighter, that's another, I'm using that. And I'm using, I've got this magic sword. So I've got 3 tags, I get +3. And therefore they can't rate those tags because I'm essentially considering a dice pool thing. I could rate those tags. I could have in the same situation, you've got angry as a tag, but maybe angry is a D8 and maybe magic sword is a D12. So more like a Cortex. So I could just have a sheet full of different words. And when you go to do something, you're allowed to pick, let's say 3. I'm making numbers up here.
Right.
You can pick 3 things.
So you would have assembled a list of these that are of your character. And then when you take action, you would have the option based on your situation to choose some Now, the
But
only,
again, that's a maybe that I'm thinking of.
yeah. I could see that potentially, unless you had some kind of interaction between the choices and the situation, could become like drives. Like, well, I'm
Yeah.
always angry, fast, and sly. And so you're always picking the ones
Yeah.
that give you the best advantage. I know We've and I have talked on a number of occasions about the idea of like the GM establishing in a scene, like what's the tone of this scene? Like, is this a high action dangerous scene, or is this a like subtle social interaction scene? And the types of character variables would interact with that differently. Like a character who's really good at kicking down doors would be less able in
Yeah.
that social scene, So I think you'd have to have something that would cause an
That's
interaction between those tags and what's going, like how well would those work or apply
Yeah,
in a
that's what
given
I'm thinking. Like,
situation?
well, probably having the GM from the GM side that says, well, actually, your difficulty is based on the approach you take. You've picked a bad approach,
Yeah,
and therefore, because your approach is bad, the difficulty is going to be higher. There's
right.
like a good way of doing it, but yeah, I'm considering that because when I'm potentially going into like a mixture of, people might just be highly skilled, or people might be have magic powers low level, or people might have cybernetics and stuff. How do you marry all together? Well, Marvel Heroic worked it out by basically going, well, all of that stuff comes under power set, sort of, and then everyone can work on the same level. But they
Yeah,
just had those just as powers. I'm thinking of expanding them to other things. But yeah, so I might not. It might just be right. Well, I'll take everything that isn't a skill, and they all go into that bucket. But that's just an option which I like, and
yeah,
which I'm thinking like, yeah, maybe. Um, but no, maybe not. And then the final one really is just skills, and you go with a really, it doesn't have to be stat plus skill. We've already said, but stat plus skill has been around for ages
yeah,
because kind of it works. The thing I said like earlier, I don't like about it. I often feel that this depends how much work the stat is doing, how much work the skill is doing. One
yeah,
of the things that really bugs me about D&D is that, like, for something like dexterity does too much work because it gets used for everything, especially
hmm,
in a modern setting. The minute you are in modern day or in sci-fi and then you use 5e, I remember doing this because I played Buck Rogers in,
yeah,
the late, I know, late 80s, early 90s. And dexterity was amazing because
yep.
dexterity was your piloting skill and it was your shooting skill,
Yeah, it
and
did
all
every
combat is
athletics.
basically
It does
shooting,
everything.
and it did everything. So then it becomes too powerful, and it's really, so then you've got to like break things up. This is why often when I'm doing skills, I will break up like heavy and light melee weapons, and I'll break up guns into different weapons. I don't like
Yeah,
one combat stat because then it's too easy to become really good at combat without going, well, actually, which actually
yeah.
maybe that is realistic, but from a game point of view, it's not much fun when someone's good at everything.
Yeah, see, what I'm thinking is what I had been thinking with stat plus skill for a dice pool is some of the skills would be like a skill like athletics. I'm not going to break that down
No.
into, cricket and
Yeah.
whatever. I'm not, that's ridiculous. And I said that. I'm just sticking with this. But guns, you would have to pick like a specialty. And my idea is that once you have like so you have 1 point in guns, you pick your first specialty, say handguns. Okay, great. When you pick up other specialties, or if you don't have other specialties, what I'm thinking is your whatever your rating is in a given specialty, if the GM says, yeah, that would apply, you could use that at -1 die. Because I mean, shooting a handgun and shooting a rifle are two different things.
Mm.
I mean, it's quite different.
I quite like the thing you said. I don't know if you did do this in Ares, but I'm sure you mentioned someone else, where kind of like your first sort of couple of levels of a skill, like level 1 and 2 in guns, you can just have level 1 and 2. But for level 3, now you have to pick a speciality.
Yeah,
And
that
like,
wasn't that, but that's kind of along the lines of what I was thinking. It's
yeah,
like kind of that
I like
same
that. I think it's good.
thing.
Like your basic level of like you're okay at driving, but to be really good, the top end, now you have to or the
Yeah,
other way is you actually only have sort of between 1 and 3 points of the base skill, but then you have specialities
right.
which fall under that base skill. But to get better, you have to take the specialities.
Yeah, I'm just
I,
thinking,
I quite
something
like that.
like academics. The moment you say I'm going to take academics, you have to pick you have to come up with a specialty. Like, oh, anthropology. So you have a point in anthropology. Well, anthropology doesn't mean you're going to have knowledge in, zoology necessarily. So your GM might say, your 2 points in anthropology doesn't grant you a single point for an incidental use. It wouldn't grant it forever. It just means you have a little bit of bleed over within that broader category. And I think I have like 13 or 14, 12, 13, I have somewhere in the range, like no more than about 15 or so skills. And some of them are those ones that would then have, you'd come up with your own specialty under it, kind of like a focus. But I don't have focuses. But so if I decided to dump attributes and just use something like a feature or a salient feature, whatever I want to call it, then the skill points, that'd be your pool.
But then you just make your skill points bigger.
Depending on what probability I'm playing with. Yeah, that's a good point.
Because that is one of the things you got to look like if you're like, I've got this sweet spot where really I can only be rolling 6 dice. If you've got stat plus skill, then your stat is only on a range of 1 to 3, and your skill is only a range of 1 to 3. But if you go, actually, I am ditching the stat, I'm just having skills. Now your skills get to be rated from 1 to 6.
Yeah.
And so now maybe actually you can kind of go, right, well, actually what I'm going to do is all skills have 2 parts. They go 1 to 3, which is the base skill. But if you want to go higher than that, you have to take specialities. Because then that gives you another thing to play. Everyone can be half decent at academics, but you can only be this good at academics, and then you have to start specializing because you need that.
Yeah,
you might get base level.
Because think about it. Like if you said, "Oh, hey, like if I represent a 1," like in World of Darkness, you've got your education levels, like your general education level, and Cyberpunk has that also. But then you have all these other specific areas. I would dispense with that. Yeah, I got to think about that because if I ended up just going to just skills, then I can adjust. What I don't want is I don't want someone rolling a pool of 9 or 10 dice.
So you see, World of Darkness, that's feasible because everything goes from 1 to 5. Correct. So your stat plus skill,
it's rare.
If you're on a 5, it is. Yeah, you're normally on sort of like 4s and 4s maximum, but yeah, you definitely can. Like Exalted goes silly because you can hit 5s easily, and then you have powers that give you more extra dice, and so that's how you can get up to your 15 and 20s.
Yeah, I don't want that. I don't want these things. I don't want these things falling all over the table.
I can't remember. I think Shadowrun off the top of my head, your stats and skills kind of go from sort of 1 to 10, which is how you can start getting up towards the 20s.
You know what, too? This also might solve, because one of the problems that I've been running into is that, with the dice pool system, you can tinker with the threshold number at or above or at or below, whatever, to gain a success. You can tinker with the number of dice, and you can also tinker with the number of successes that you need. So you have 3 different things you can tinker with, and all of them mess with the probability differently. And I'm leery of including all 3 of those as possible dials to turn, or thinking of them being available to both GM and player. It might muddy the waters, and it muddies the waters a lot more when you have a bigger pool of dice. It seems like if I have a more limited pool, because here's what I was concerned about is, you don't want to make a game where like you're failing left and right.
Nope.
But you also don't want to make a game where it's, as I say, like California Little League. I don't want that. And so, I'm looking for that sweet spot in the middle. And where things started to break or feel like they potentially would break for me is where you had 6 or more dice in a pool. Given the different numbers I was using, it turned out to be like you'd just be rolling over things. So I'm going to revisit that.
I think particularly when you're looking at
your guys, kind of fun sometimes.
Yeah, but when you think about your system is mostly normal level people who aren't going to be crazy strong, or they might be dumb, but then dumb could be just they've got poor academics, which is different,
right?
Because maybe they're not dumb, maybe they're just poorly educated. But actually, your guys are not
educated and stupid.
Yeah, but your guys aren't. You haven't got people that are like peak level humans. They're just normal average Joes. So their skills are really what's going to define them. In which case, you don't need stats. You need your stat, but you can just, and then your skills, you get more, your skills become more granular now. Because now instead of playing on like I said, rather than a scale of 1 to 3 for stat and 1 to 3 for skill, because you don't want to go more than 6 dice, now you can go 1 to 6 for skill,
Yeah.
or
And
1
fine
to 7,
slice
whatever.
the skill a little more.
But hell of it, go 1 to 7, because then if you have 7 in that skill, you know you're amazing at it.
Why 7?
Because 7's lucky.
Oh yeah.
See, now you know what I've just realized I want to do now.
And it's a prime number too. That makes it cool.
Guess what number do you think I want to go to for the most of things you can have in your mouse of dice you can roll?
11?
I want to go to 11. Yeah.
That would be cool.
I'm just like, right. Because what I did want is I wanted to be using all the different polys. I wanted to be able to use the whole lot and just you're rolling a bunch of different things. And I was going to do it like sort of, I don't know, Savage Worlds maybe, where you're rolling a bunch of, but instead, what I don't like about Savage Worlds is I don't like 2 different dice. I wanted more like Cortex, where you're going to roll like 4 or 5 dice. I didn't want to add them. I just wanted to go target number. So obviously a 12 is like almost always going to put that kind of, that's what I was thinking. Not too far away from what Free League does with its.
Yeah, with the step dice.
I wasn't going to use 6.
It's actually really a clean system.
I was going to use 4 because then a D4 like isn't completely used. It gives me 1 more dice, but then I can't roll 11 dice.
Yeah, that's too many.
Maybe
instead of 11 dice, you just focus on the number 11. And you figure out a way like 11 somehow becomes meaningful.
Yeah, but you can only do that if you're rolling. Maybe I'll just do what you said and play with D12s and then have 11 be the crit.
You want
and 12, you've gone beyond
11.
it. You've gone over 11, so now 12's bad.
Yeah.
This is the trouble with dice. There's so many different options.
I know. There's so many different options and so many different ways.
Yeah, and once you've picked one, then you're just like, oh, but this other thing sounds so much better. So yeah, I'm still tinkering my dice ideas.
Yeah, you know what I'm gonna do? I am gonna, because I'm hopefully my group gets together this weekend and we'll do a one-off because we're missing some people. I'm gonna tweak my system to dump attributes and instead throw in some like bonuses to differentiate by type of character, like archetype of character. And I'm going to see how it works. So I will have a report about that next time we meet.
I think what I need to do, and I said this to you previously, I need to write up like a phrase, I can't think of the word for it. I basically need to write up some characters and just with pure description, just literally just text. Like six a good number, 6 characters. These are 6 different characters you should be able to play in my game. And then work out what is the best way of mapping the different kind of ways you can do to those characters. Yeah. Because when I've written them out, it might be actually stats not important, roles important, or it might be that no, roles are irrelevant. It's the powers that make these characters, or these are so disparate and do weird stuff that the only way I can do this is like a tag based thing where you have a list of tags and those tags mean something. And then when I come to make right, I just need to make sure that all these tags appear in a very clear list. So yeah, I need to do that. Which I would do some.
That keeps you rooted in the story side of your game. I think it keeps you focused on the story instead of getting tied up in the mechanics. And I like story and character over mechanics, but I have found myself in working on this game losing that and just getting completely focused on mechanics. And so getting away from that, I think, is reminding yourself that what do the mechanics exist for? They don't exist for themselves.
I think the problem you've got, and I'm going to have the same problem, is that you don't have a setting. You are playing in a genre.
That's true.
And I have a similar thing that I am not playing in a setting. I'm probably the closest way to say it is I'm playing in a style. I know what the style of my game is. Okay, my game is sort of like, anime meets like computer games. That's the style of my game. I know there's this space in which my game, so like almost to some extent, like Outgunned is going for action movies and variations of that. I'm going for like where I'm going for cutscenes. I'm going for like the intro trailers and cutscenes of films and games. That's like the style I am aiming at. It means I don't have a setting, but I can make up the characters that I want you to be able to play in my game.
Right.
And that I can do.
That's your priority.
So I need to do that. I need to try and work.
That's your goal because I'm away next week. We won't record next week so that you
just went away.
I have to go. I'm going out of town for work. On vacation, and I have to go out of town for work. So you have an assignment and I have a play test. So you got to catch up.
Yeah.
Great.
So I may have made no progress by next week.
Well, hopefully, I know I will have. That's my plan. So
Yeah,
then I have to do it.
My time
right.
does not look good for that.
Perfect. Thank you, as always, for listening to Fluff and Crunch. You can join our Discord. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel, all through the links in the show notes. Thanks again. Have a great day. We look forward to talking with you.